stories within stories, stories about stories, which makes it a bit hard to choose a representative part that's going to speak for the book as a whole. I had 3 or 4 that we read out at the launch a few weeks ago across the street, which I thought were pretty good. And Alison was at the launch and she came up to me and said, you know, you can't read any of those when you come to play there. So I've had to choose a different one, which I think is still pretty good. The stories, although they're different in those ways, they revolve around the same family, and they focus on one character in particular, Mark Ferguson, his sister Laura, and their sister Bella. And this story is mostly Laura. It's narrated by somebody outside the family, unusually. It's a guy who's dressed as a Buddhist monk, though he is not himself a Buddhist monk. It's around 5 in the morning. It's New York. The story is called Dumbo because they're in that part of New York down under the Manhattan Bridge overpass. Dumbo. And the first person you're going to hear is Laura, who's speaking about Bella. She's 25. She's a resident, a little doctor. It's hard for her. They work such crazy hours, and for what? It's a kind of organized torture. And she said she'd had enough. She took time off. No one does that, but Bella does. I love that. But she's not on vacation. She booked herself a spot on this boat to crew on this guy's yacht from Bali to Sydney. It's some kind of race they do every year, a 40-foot yacht in the Pacific Ocean. She never even went paddleboarding up north, but you wouldn't know with your vowed silence, your balls in your little purse. I think she was a genius. That's not why we love her. She's so good. She's goodness personified. No, that's not true, but she tries to be. Selfless. Smile for everyone. And she said part of it was, at the hospital, it was the simple amount of suffering, the number of times each day you have to say no, just to survive. Get through the day. Seen things now. 4-year-old's heart drops onto the floor. No mother coming back for her triplets, her fingers dipping through a red bag of eyeballs. Someone hit a rubber ducky in the cadaver's head. Stories she told about those bodies. You nod. You smile. You listen. And when she speaks again, her voice is quieter, grainier. They were in a storm, and suddenly beneath them a platform was rising. This creature, 10 times the size of their boat. The captain yells, "Come back!" Red chains on its back. 100 kinds of kelp from 100 oceans. When it breathes, it's like the sky roars. You can't feel your legs. Suddenly they're 20 feet in the air yelling, and the boat shouldn't be in the air like this, and it's like it knows, and suddenly it slams left, snap, so the rudder breaks underneath, and the boom swings round 1,000 miles an hour, and Bella, my sister, she throws herself down to push the captain out of the way. She's a hero. Only she goes head first into the head of the second mate. He's diving out of the way himself. The mate's fine, but Bella's skull is fractured. Skull fracture in the southeastern Pacific Ocean. And she's the one with all the medical knowledge. I haven't seen land for 8 days. Chopper came 18 hours later. That was 3 days ago. We just heard. Now she's in Sydney. I don't think she's going to make it. The whale went away. Didn't even know they were there. It's like a bug on your back. He told me once they have this thing that if you drown, you can be dead for 20 minutes and they can bring you back because it's cold. Your heart slows down to a halt and your breath stops, but you're not dead. They can bring you back. She didn't drown. She hit her head. And what was she thinking while they waited? Wonder. Dreaming. She wanted to go on every rowboat in the park. Our tiny hands in our tiny red mitts. We used to sit on the, what do you call it, together? In the bows? Our dad would row us along. Our mum always made us stop. She always said it was time to go home. Why? Now I have to go. No one else can go. I don't think I can go. She made music, she made songs. She made barricades and threw rocks at cop cars all the way through school. Her songs are all I can hear. Maybe you can tell me something. Did you tell me something? Tell me what the Buddha would say. I saw her when she was born. I visited Mom in hospital. I touched her little skull. I mean, a little soft head. Fontanelle. Her hand is on your forearm. She's grabbing you tight through the red fabric that came from your son's warm-up jacket, staring at you. He cut it off and he cried. But you do what you have to do to survive. It'll help him in the moment. Oh, fucking Christ, she says. Would you look at the time? I have to go. So she stands up, but before she can go, she's digging around for her phone. She stops again because you're standing with her. You can understand a goddamn word I said. She went. You do your nod. You do your prayer. When you were a lawyer back home, you took on cases like this, civil action, duty of care. That was a lifetime ago. Will you take this? She says, take this and do some good with it. God knows the world needs it. She presses $200 bills into your hand. And 3 more. Oh, take it. She says, I don't need it. Say a prayer for me. For all of us, for my family. Sit Shiva. Now, and at the hour of our deaths, read her the Book of the Dead. Whatever it is you do. Carousel lights up. It's never happened here, not at this time of day. It's like a saint's fallen asleep against a switch. And in the air now, like baking smells, muted background music, like the music in a movie you dreamed of. Like the life you thought you'd have once. And the growing frenzy of the animals rising and falling bright against the gray buildings and the gray sky, rising and falling, and the two of you in your skirts. Now she pushes her whole glove into her eye to wipe the tears away.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I messed that up. It was a copy and paste issue. And then, so not only is this book, honestly, and I say it without being hyperbolic, it's a masterclass in the short story. For people who are writing short stories and thinking, am I doing this right? This is a book that shows there's no right way of creating an incredible story. But you're also a master at this reading thing, which I'm like, Jess Taylor, thank you so much for coming back. Jess is a writer and poet who works on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, and the Mississaugas of the Credit in the city we currently call Toronto. Her second collection, Just Pervs, amazing, was released by Book Hug in Canada in September 2019. Recently, Just Pervs was a finalist for the 2020 Lambda Literary Award in Bisexual Fiction. A short story from that collection, Two Sex Addicts Fall in Love, was longlisted for the Journey Prize. The title story from her first collection, Paul, received the 2013 Gold Fiction National Magazine Award. Play is her first novel. Jess, welcome.
And thank you everyone for being here. I was clapping so hard for Damian that I spilled water all over my pants, so I apologize for that. It's just so lovely to be here at Junction Reads. It's one of my favorite reading series to read at because Allison gives everybody a gift in that she reads our books with such care and then asks us these really insightful questions that, you know, whenever you are doing a Q&A, the way that someone like comes up with questions and engages in conversation with you, like reveals layers to your own work and how people respond to your work that you haven't ever thought of before. So definitely stick around for the Q&A. I think she's got some good questions for us. This is my first novel play. I was working on it for a long time. Okay, so 10 years, and I'm happy that it's out. And yeah, usually I don't go into too much detail about it, except for I will tell you that it's a bit of a coming of age novel. It's been described that way, but coming of age when you're in your 30s, you've been dragging childhood trauma along. That's kind of kept you from advancing and getting to go through that coming of age process when, you know, most people would as they advance from their teenage years through their 20s. And so it's told in 3 parts through childhood, the years of her 20s, and in her 30s in kind of a interesting way, which we'll talk more about in the Q&A. Spoilers, but so I'll just jump into the beginning. The only secrets Adrian likes are the ones we have together. He's cutting sticks from trees, and I'm here to do whatever he needs. My hands are hidden in gloves so that he doesn't know my knuckles are torn up again. A secret. Okay, I'm going to hold the sticks steady, and you're going to wrap them. I nod. The sticks are taller than either of us. I'm already almost as tall as Adrian, who has always been skinny and small for his age. I'm 9, he's 12. We're at the edge of the age where the differences start to disappear and age doesn't seem to matter anymore. Although I've always been the one he wants to play with and be around. His thin bones and gaunt face make him look taller than he is, like he's a thin stick that's been cut from a tree himself. Neither of us can ever eat enough, always hungry, even back then. But I go through stages where I grow a little pot belly. My arms, tanned and freckled by the summer sun, gain a layer of baby fat chub. Adrian gathers the top of the sticks together, splays their other ends out to make a cone structure that we could fit in. I wrap the twine we took from Uncle Jim's garage around the top. You've got to make an infinity sign or they'll all fall apart, Adrian says. We switch. I hold the sticks and he holds the twine and shows me how to wrap it, up and down and around. The sun's hot on my black t-shirt, Mickey Mouse printed on the front, wagging his finger. The shirt used to be Adrian's. Most of my clothes were Adrian's. My parents don't notice that I faded into Adrian's family, as if that's where we belong. Later, I'll think that maybe they just didn't understand what goes into making kids, raising them. I live as proof of their love, but proof doesn't feel. We've been playing the lighted city for years, and of all of our games, it's had the most staying power. The image of glowing skyscrapers and houses and a village for us to call our own. Some games just do that, reveal things about who you are and who you want to be. The game has existed as long as we've played together, but it's twisted and evolved over time. Out there is a city that is waiting for us, both Adrian and me, and we know the place is perfect. Adrian imagines a place with no parents. I imagine a place where we are in charge and worshipped. Adrian imagines a place where we can be together. I imagine a place so beautiful it hurts when you look at it. The game always starts the same. We are walking in the forest and we hear something call to us. The leaves hissing in the wind are carrying a message. First, they speak to me. Adrian does the voice. Paul, we need you, Paul. We don't know what to do. Our people are dying. They are cold and hungry, Paul. Only you can save us. Adrian is with me because he is always with me when I play. When I'm alone, at home, I draw, I sort my stuffed animals, and I think about the next time I'll play with Adrian. Any ideas I have, I save up for him. That's the way he likes it. Do you hear that? I ask Adrian, who is no longer the voices of the people of the lighted city. He is himself again. What is it? People. I think they're in trouble. This way. We cut through the forest. Adrian follows close behind me as we go deeper and deeper. Wait, he says. I think I hear them too. Now I become the voices. Adrian, it's you and Paul we need. You are always destined to rule us. We need you to bring the light back to the lighted city. Please save us. Adrian and I look at each other, ourselves again, and we start to run through the forest. As we run, trees beside us begin to burst into flames at the tips of their branches, lighting our way. The path ahead gets darker and colder, but our very beings bring the warmth and light. We come to a clearing lit by a circle of trees that hold flames. The fire doesn't burn the trees, though. It doesn't work that way. Look, Adrian says, and he touches the tip of a branch, and the fire doesn't burn him. It cannot because he is its creator. Adrian, I say, because what is beyond the clearing is amazing. There are skyscrapers made of glass and twisted tree limbs and branches, dark windows slowly lighting up as our presence fills the clearing. Tiny huts just big enough to house a person or two lead up to where the skyscrapers are, and in front of each house a fire lights. People begin to come out of the houses, and the sticks they hold emit light from their tips as soon as they walk toward us. We're saved, they exclaim and warm their hands at the front yard fires. Adrian takes a backpack off and pulls out bags of rice, lentils, chickens, vegetables, all food we've stolen from the dinner table. The townspeople come and take the food, share it out amongst themselves, and begin to cook and feast. Music starts to play in celebration. What is this place? Adrian says to a boy closest to him. Don't you know, Your Majesty? You're home. You've reached the lighted city. And it's true, we're the king and queen, the way it was always meant to be. Adrian takes my hand and we kiss. At the beginning, that's how the game ends. Now. For a long time, I didn't even let myself think the name Adrian. Everything that happened with the lighted city was only what happened to me, or the day everything happened. I hid all my bad experiences in a chest where they wouldn't be able to touch me. Any complicated feelings I felt, they went in there too. By keeping them tied away, I could continue to live. That was also something that felt hard for me. Sometimes it still feels hard. But everything always came out in dreams, especially once I moved to Toronto. And then in 2016, things got worse the way they need to before they get better. That was when things started to change. When I started to really look at those things in the chest and wonder if I had any hope of being a person who felt at peace. Dr. Johnson recommended I try writing everything down to see if I can make more sense of it all. Selena, she prefers. To see if I can be more honest with writing than I am in our sessions together. Not it, I have to stop doing that. I need to call things what they were, the lighted city, Adrian, everything that happened in 2016 when I was close to finally losing myself. The notebook I pick is black leather. When it arrives at the door, I peel open the cardboard and hold it in my hands. It suits the way I feel about my memories, I suppose. I open it and the spine creaks. On the first page, I write instructions for myself. You will talk about 2016. You will talk about the lighted city. You will be brave and truthful. You will get to the bottom of what happened. I put a piece of masking tape on the cover and then write on it in black permanent marker how it happened. Because I realize that's what I want to figure out. Not just what happened, although that's important too. I don't always feel I can trust my memories. In some places there are gaps, or things begin to blur and look different. And as I look at the cover, even it blurs and changes. How could it have happened? Sometimes it feels like I've been working so hard for the past 9 years, yet I still end up trying the next thing that promises to make me feel in control of my life. But I want to live, or at least I want to try to want to live. So that's something, I guess. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jess. When I posted a picture of the book after reading it, I used the word joyful in describing my experience reading this book. And I realize it might not feel that way for anyone who didn't have childhood trauma, I guess. But Paul is full of hope. And even though she's carving through her therapy very slowly, it felt very joyful to me. I hope you'll all buy it and read it. Thanks, Jess. Anna Dowdall is here in real life this time to talk about her latest book. Anna Dowdall has been a reporter, a nurse's aide, a graphic artist, a college lecturer, a planner, a union thug, a translator, a baker, a book conservator, a pilot, and a horticultural advisor, as well as other things best forgotten. She is the author of 2 young adult fantasy novels, which were longlisted for the American Catherine Peterson Prize and the Crime Writers of Canada's Unpublished Novel Award. Her 3 genre-bending literary mysteries, April on Paris Street, The Au Pair, and After the Winter, feature evocative settings and a preoccupation with the lives of women. The Suspension Bridge, officially launching this Tuesday with Radiant Press, has been named a most anticipated fall fiction title with 49th Shelf. Anna is from the Junction as well. Welcome.
About the same height. You can hear me. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming on this cold, rainy November night. Thank you, Allison, and the Junction Reads crew, Cayley and my daughter, Daisy, here just discovered that they attended the same high school. Kind of a niche high school called St. Joseph's College School for Girls, you know, and they were one year apart, and they had that recognition moment. And anyway, that was pretty strange. And I'm going to be reading to you from a book that prominently features a Catholic girls' high school. Okay, sure. So as I was listening to Damian, and he was talking about a ship, and there was a scene I was going to read in which some terrible, and yet I love him very much, character called Brother Cyprian a monk watches a ship go down during a storm on the seaway. And I thought after that, that is now fated. I must read this scene. And Jess comes up and she reads this section about this young woman who's seeking revelation, and then I'm afraid I have to switch right back and say, no, the other scene that I was going to read originally is strange scene where Sister Harriet finds can you still these things. Anyway, the heroine of the book, Sister Harriet, she's just arrived at her new teaching assignment. Yeah. At St. Reginald's in the town she grew up in, where she had experienced herself some trauma. This is actually a comic novel, though, so I just said trauma, but I need to say comic. And her first sight of the bridge when she's coming in with the other nun on the train is, it strikes her as malevolent and all powerful and something mystical, and she can't explain it, and she faints. And then we don't talk about the bridge for a little while, but the section I'm going to read to you here shows that, the effect that the bridge has had on her, and then what she does, which is never fully explained. So if you can't understand what's happening, don't worry. You could read the whole book and still not understand why she did what she did. All right. So, so this is from a chapter called Puny Tumbleweed. All right. She has attended her first meeting of a strange civic committee that the bishop wants her to be on, and she doesn't yet know why. And she was all confused about why she had to be the representative of the bishop on this committee. And she's come out, but she thinks it's gone well, but she hasn't got a clue. But anyway, the bishop is using her as a cat's paw in some kind of strange, zany, industrial heist plot line that has yet to be revealed. But anyway, she thinks the meeting went well. She was surrounded by all these men. The novel is set in 1962, so she's a young nun trying to find herself a little bit in 1962, and so she thinks, okay, well that went well. She still doesn't really know what's going on, but she'll continue to have her. Oh yes, I should have mentioned this. Sorry. She also, although she's come to teach at this Catholic school, and she's kind of realized that somewhere along the way she's lost her faith entirely, which puts her in a somewhat of an awkward position. I tried to milk that, but whatever comedy, different kind of comedy that I gravitate towards, and so she's already sort of in a perfect princess of her own. However, this is all about how you survive, and this is a story about survival and its opposite, I guess, the death wish. All right, so you will be glad that I'm not going to go into the details of this civic meeting that she attended, but I'll just wrap it up, because then there's a part I want to read you, and then the thing that won't make sense. All right. When Mayor Martel asked for a seconder to adjourn the meeting, Sister Harriet timidly called out, "I second." Everyone beamed, so that was all right. A pleasant committee all round, and the way they all agreed with each other offered a refreshing contrast to that novices committee she'd sat on. Once she figured out her role more clearly, she'd feel more at ease. No one had said a thing about design or her role. And thus, at an astonishing 11:45, the meeting of the Bridge Design Committee concluded. In stuffing her items into her satchel, Harriet was taken aback to see that she'd written at one point in the evening, around the time she'd had that funny impression of Mr. Byron Slade, the words "Committee of Dark Designs." She knew immediately the name would stick. Harriet slid into her coat, left her gloves on the windowsill for later, and headed home. The next day was filled with lurid accounts of wildcat walkouts on a scale apparently not anticipated that turned into clashes with police and rioting. St. Reginald stood outside the city center and therefore was in little danger, but Mother Superior Perpetua summoned the entire school to discuss safety. The boarders were to stay on school grounds, and the day girls would have to exercise caution going home. Girls were to remain calm. It was more a case of them not looking too entertained, although a few students who'd seen grainy pictures on television, black smoke, people running, sirens howling in the background, seemed genuinely frightened. The staff received the news phlegmatically, all but very young Sister Clotilde, who cared tenderly for the Academy cat, and who began to sob. All this was something of a contretemps to Harriet, but she went to see Perpetua anyway before lunch. Perpetua seemed only moderately interested in her account of the meeting. "Your role will be evident in time, sister. You will be visiting Bishop Aloysius soon, in any case." Harriet nodded deferentially. I took very thorough notes. She added contriteness to her look of virtue. "I did a foolish thing. I left my gloves behind in the council chamber. I called. I can pick them up whenever I like. It's just gloves, but they were given to me by Reverend Mother Alexandra when I took my vows. They came from that very exclusive clerical garb shop in Rome, the one near the Pantheon, Barbicone." In these allusions, Harriet demonstrated intelligence. Alexandra would have given her the traditional gift in lieu of the family she pitifully lacked.
As for the reference to Barbacone, who didn't know Barbacone? You want to get them today, sister? Perpetua sounded uncertain. The situation in the city is very unstable. I was thinking the same thing, Reverend Mother. However, City Hall is away from the unrest. I'll be worried until I retrieve them. I was very careless. The gloves mean a lot to me. They were top-grade kidskin with a frivolous button trim and an unusual Bemberg Kupro lining in the fingers, and they did mean a lot to Harriet. Very well, sister, but go before dark. Do you have the bridge project this afternoon? I'm sure Mr. Montserrat can manage by himself. Go right after your last class. Such an unexpected bonus, although it suggested chance favored her, left Harriet feeling guilty as she drove into the city later. She takes every opportunity she can to drive around in the convent's cross-country Rambler station wagon, and this is yet another opportunity. She listened to the news before leaving. Violence was now sporadic and had moved west to the factory sector. Things might be winding down. A fog had begun to creep in from the river. She turned on her headlamps and drove carefully as the day darkened and outlines blurred. Picking up her gloves from the security desk, including a chummy exchange with last night's security guard, Trevor, took a minute. Then, taking a deep, if ragged breath, she headed towards the bridge. She told herself she wanted to see the bridge up close, closer than she'd seen it before. She parked at the same spot along the canal, and now the fog was a real pea souper, and the bridge was amorphous and indeterminate. The walkout must have been responsible for the eerie silence. She took a rough incline down to the main gates. These were wide open and unguarded. She saw no one. She entered the vast construction zone. As she neared it, the bridge took shape, a compelling black presence in the gray. There was a cluttered space to get through, lanes, equipment, huddle structures. You couldn't tell in the murk. And that took some time. The giant curves of the bridge appeared to pulse invitingly as the fog thinned and thickened. This bridge didn't mess around. You didn't have to cross hundreds of feet of traffic circles, on-ramps, and what have you. The ground was flat, bridgeless, and then it wasn't. You were between massive trusses, and an aggressive slope rose under your feet. It would have been difficult for Harriet to climb this way. A wall of heavy equipment confronted her, conjuring the tanks of a hostile army. The other day, she'd seen a spiral staircase in a protective cage, climbing the bridge's outward structure at the water's edge. It soared bizarrely high, but seemed sturdy, at least from a distance in the dusk. It would bring her by the fastest route to the top of the bridge. To get to the stairs, she descended over broken ground, glad she was wearing flat-soled shoes, not those little Cuban heel jobs the shorter sisters favored. The smell of the river became strong, and the dull sheen of blood and water appeared. She came at length to the stairs. Reflecting that worksite security could have been better, Harriet hiked her skirts and began to climb. The climb seemed very long. She couldn't assess her progress in the fog. She sensed she was getting very hot. The air changed, became fresher and colder, and the fog changed to a brighter fog. Often she thought, this must be the last run, until finally it was, when she stepped onto a roughly paved surface into a fit. It took her a few minutes to catch her breath. She looked around. She stood in a world of delicate, pink-tinted mist that moved continuously. When it thinned, graciously soaring trusses became visible, leading her forward, and when it thickened, she felt like one of those fresco cherubs bobbing in the candy floss of paradise. Was gravity somehow weaker up here? Or was the bridge in its gravity-defying purpose lifting her upward as it disappeared into the roseate ether? The roseate ether, in case you remember what this was. Along with the bodily likeness, Harriet's mind was curiously transformed. Her burdens lifted. The dilemmas of her life seemed at this moment unimportant. A wordless prayer formed in her soul and blew away like a puny tumbleweed in the wind. The beautiful iridescent swirls glowed brighter, charged with urgency. She had the impression of a dazzling causeway opening before her, leading her to the point where the bridge ended, to infinite lightness, infinity itself. She was like a deer in the headlights, but not concerned. She advanced for a while. Then she stopped. Whatever existed beyond the pink wall, this was far enough for today. She sat down on a hard concrete bollard in a mood of waning satisfaction, thinking the wind blew a trifle chilly. Her breath turned into a sigh. She liked it here, but the euphoria was gone. That vertical hamster run had to be tackled in reverse. It would be best to get out of the construction zone before anyone requiring explanations came back. Perpetua would be getting worried. Later that evening, she thought about what she had done. It had been a heady experience, undoubtedly. Like heroin, maybe? She knew nothing about heroin, but she'd been reading about it, the scourge of modernity that promised bliss. Perhaps heroin would be just as disappointing as her first taste of wine. Climbing the bridge, on the other hand, had been wonderful in its way. She had come to her senses, though, and she had broken half a dozen rules and offended twice that number of niceties today. She felt the irony of her situation. Even if she didn't believe a thing anymore, she could still feel a familiar pinch of sin. Thank you, babe.
It is a very funny book. Even, and you're all gonna think I'm completely insane now, even the deaths in the book are kind of funny, in a strange way. Thank you so much, Anna. Jess.
Okay, sorry.
I don't know if anyone's here was here when I nearly choked to death last year. Cayley, those, when your throat closes up to save your lungs, and then you can't breathe and you're choking and you're right there in the middle of a question. It was a good time.
I had the identical experience with Jess. I was telling her for having a front row seat at Centaur Theatre in Montreal, and I feel like a bachelor wreck. I just kind of walk out in front of everybody, and the more I try to control it, the worse it gets.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Because you're just like immediately seized.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have a Q&A now. If you would all join us. I'll see if I can figure out how to do this without chirping everybody like I did the last time. I can't leave. Thank you very much, all three of you. And thank you everyone for coming. I didn't thank you all before we got started. So thank you, and thanks to everybody online. I'm going to start. I have directed questions. Despite a lot of commonality, which we'll get to in the questions, each book is quite unique. And so I have a question for each of you individually, and then collective questions.
You are the first.
So Mark Anthony Jarman described the collection as a pleasing chaos, like Nabokov on acid. Because what we have in the end is exactly this, a contemplative collection that weaves in and out of what we as a reader should understand, may or may not be real, or factual, maybe is a better word. Stories written by Mark Ferguson or Mark Ferguson Cohane, which I thought was hysterical. There's a story in the collection that Bella edits, and it's very funny, which may or may not be autobiographical. There's a story written by another character as an assignment for a creative writing teacher named Damian Tarnopolsky. I'd love for you to share the process, not only of writing and collecting with the stories. Some of them were written 15 years ago, some of them were written way more recently, but how you put them together and brought them together in the end.
Great question. Can I say something else before I answer? I'm going to. I've known Alison for almost 20 years. We figured this out the other day. And I met her because I walked into the bookmark in Etobicoke where my wife was working. The woman who became my wife was working. And there was a sign up looking for people for a writers group, and I joined, and that's how we met. And that was a great experience. In spite of, I think we have pretty much opposite aesthetic instincts, as far as I can tell. Yeah. Well, I have.
Jane.
So,
Yes, you do.
So that was wonderful. And then, yeah, then she mentioned I did a PhD, and I finished a PhD with a kind of like clunk, like a crash, and no one would hire me because I didn't have any teaching experience. And you get into that circle of trying to get employed. And I was telling Alison about it. She said, "Well, come and teach for me." And I said, "But I've never done it." And Alison said, So I got some teaching experience, and then I wound up teaching at continuing studies at U of T. So imagine. And then there's more. I wrote a play, and I wanted to get the play read and staged. And I thought, I don't know any theatre people, and I don't know how to do this. I know somebody who does a prose reading series, and so I mentioned it to Alison kind of offhand. Immediate yes, and she put on my play at a theatre within 6 weeks. So you can imagine. This is why I had to say all this. You can imagine how deeply I'm in this person's debt. And she's doing this reading series. This thing exists. This incredible thing that continues to exist because of Alison, a time when there's so little coverage of books, so little support, so few readings, so few opportunities for people to hear about what's being written. And here we are because of her incredible efforts. So can we just give a round of applause to her? Thanks everybody, and ensures that everybody is thanked, and she doesn't get thanked enough. So I wanted to take it back.
Free books though.
Oh, I take it all back. Yeah, you're keeping the flame alive. Thank you. So help her out, buy some books, and buy the raffle tickets, and keep coming and help the store out, and keep the flame alive yourself. You're keeping the flame alive. You're here. It's on. Okay. The question. No, I got it. Yeah, it was about fish.
That's right.
So the collection is it's a pleasing chaos. There's a lot of different things. Pragmatically, it was stories that I wrote over many years that I came to put together. I started thinking about ways that they might work together, and that was kind of really the most interesting part of the process. I was working with my wonderful editor Jane, who's in the back row over there, who you should all hire and meet. And we had a bit of a back and forth about coherence. I had a bit of the same back and forth with the publisher about coherence. I found other people wanted the collection to be a bit more novelistic, to come together a bit more fully than I wanted it to. But I felt as well, I kind of knew I was being a bit adolescent, a bit sort of childish in fighting coherence to the degree I was. So it ended up coming together in a way that I like, in a thematic way, because the book is about personality, the book is about time, the book is about looking at yourself over a different time, and about questioning who you are at a different time and how that changes. So how it came together became, well, one of the editors said, well, the book as a whole is the 16th story. There's 15 stories, and then that question about how it all comes together is the 16th one.
Yes, it is chaotic, but as I said, a real teaching moment for people who are entrenched in this idea about following the rules. This is not following any rules, which I think is great. It's like a good thing. Jess, mystery. This is I'm gonna tell everybody, this is the first time I sent the questions to everybody. Last time I felt a tremendous amount of anxiety after our Q&A because I thought I caught the authors off guard a little bit. So everyone got the questions. So Jess, mystery exists in many great novels. The what happened or what will happen or how it happened keeps readers reading. But what I thought about while reading the book was not necessarily about what is going to happen from like a reader's perspective. The mystery of Paul and Adrian is being revealed to the reader as much as it's being revealed to Paul. But I want to talk to you about memory, because it's really not just what happened or how it happened, but how Paul is experiencing remembering all of that.
Yeah, I think that's entirely right. Like, I debated a little bit around how much should be being revealed to the reader as well as it is for Paul as she's kind of like going through and processing, because like you want it to be like still interesting to a reader, so that kind of like how some of the interest develops, but at the same time you don't want the reader to kind of feel like there's too much left out. But at the same time, I also like didn't want to like sensationalize trauma or anything like that. So I wanted to like be always like, you know, not like gratuitous and like how I'm like talking about things and that kind of stuff. But yeah, like in terms of memory, like that's part of why the book's fragmented in the way that it is like to sort of replicate how memory, like especially like a post-traumatic sort of experience of memory is, and like how memory is also cyclical. And I think what I didn't mention when I introduced the book is that in the present day, when Paul's going through, she kind of like alludes to it a little bit in the section I read. She's going through like a cognitive processing therapy, which is a therapy that is used for PTSD. It's like an actual like protocol and manual. And so that therapy had come into my life in a way when I was like trying to find like an organizing principle for the book. And I was like, oh, like I was going through it for an accident I experienced, but I was also working on a work project that involved me like going really deep into the protocol. And I was like, this was what was missing. And it was like, I was working on this book about trauma and all these like the same it was like multiple layers of my life and kind of like directed me to this type of therapy. And really what that's about is like you recall the traumatic instances as if they are in the present moment, and it allows you to reprocess them. And so like you kind of like reinterpret or like you store the memory in like a different place in your brain. And yeah, so like that's kind of like, I guess, part of the process of the novel is also about like reintegrating memory. And I think you can feel that, and you can feel it in like how Paul's perspective and like sense of self shifts as well.
And those sections are written in the present tense too,
Yeah.
which has this like both dreamlike quality in that it may or may not be real, but also in the way that dreams are real. Like they're right here and you're experiencing them. It was great. The change in tense worked really well.
Yeah, so the present tense thing, like partially that was like, you know, you want to feel like those things are immediate. So it was like a stylistic decision, but also the protocol like wants you to be recalling things in present tense. So it's like as if, because that's how memory really works, especially like a post-traumatic memory. It's like you're back in that moment. And so you need to be doing that. So that was also really interesting to me, that like my impulse as a writer was also like reflected in like how the psychology actually works. Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah.
Anna, the novel takes place in the shadow of Vatican II and the identity of faith, the crisis of faith that Sister Harriet is experiencing. I want to talk about what drew you to this time period and the setting of an all-girls convent school. There's so much in general happening in 1962, 1963 in the world in North America. And I'm curious how all of the elements came together.
Thank you. Am I holding it the right? Okay, all right. Good. Well, 1962 seemed pivotal to me. It was, a moment where, this is very false history, right, of the world, filtered through, many TV shows that we watch and quite enjoy. But, there was a period of traditionalism, and then it started to break down and fritter away, and then, something, and then the possibility of reshaping our lives, with more equity, et cetera, kind of somehow arose. So that, I felt that was a sufficient frame for a story that is, both fabular and fairy tale like, where I kind of, deliberately move away from history and any kind of too subtle view of history. I want, if there's subtlety in the book, it doesn't come from the way I represent history, but it might come from the way I undercut the little truisms that are offered, and so it's more, so it's dodgier and it's kind of cagier, but definitely one of the things, the way when we write these novels that are allegedly historical, we prep, or probably any novel, and so I spent a good 2 years procrastinating by reading books like highbrow stuff, like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which came out in 1962. Reread Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique, which came out in 63. And what other, anyway, that would, also, now this has nothing to do with the 60s, but it pertained to the way I wanted to suggest it was kind of a hidden menace in that over-optimistic, consumerist, dreams of avarice kind of mentality that at least some people in Buttonville, which is kind of an evil place under the surface, how they think. So then the other book that I somehow felt I needed to read was It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. But maybe that was more interesting for me because I, then condensed the world into this kind of small parochial city with, mayors. We all know Canadian mayors. Everybody knows a mayor called Larry Martel. And I call him once his blandness later in the story. So I wanted these types to, in a banal way, represent things that were very broad. Not that I was taking a moralist approach at all in the story. It was more I was really trying to enjoy myself and to and I hope that my readers would enjoy in the same way. But I thought it was a good moment to pick up on, I wanted to create some effects. And I wanted someone a little bit zany, like Sister Harriet, and I couldn't put her in the modern world, but I could put her in 62. So I could have that mixture of, like she's thinking about her future, and she's sounding quite a feminist. She's saying, oh, it's going to be great teaching at this girls' school, and the world belongs to girls and women, and and she's going to be a science teacher, although she's really shaky, just shaking that foundations. But so she's very excited about that part. So she's really caught between several worlds, actually, among several worlds, and I just thought 62 sounds right, for the point I wanted to make. Also, the clothes were really nice.
Yes, that's, as someone who likes vintage clothing, I did think of that, and the idea of not that I was around in 1962, but the idea that Vatican II was going to be this big change, this the world's going to be so much better now. The Catholic Church is reforming or whatever, and just as you said, I like that word false. Okay, so this is a question for all of you, and a sort of follow-up question to my question to Jess about memory. In Jess's book play, Paul says, you can't change the past by looking at it, which is absolutely true. The past is the past. What happened is what happened. But the real past is an abstraction, really, of childhood memories that sometimes feel more or less true. In Damian's first story in the collection, it opens with a childhood memory that as a reader we carry throughout the collection. I found myself thinking about that first story often. And Anna Ruth, her birth name, it's like a lost identity that Sister Harriet put in a pocket with a big hole in years ago. So I want to talk to you about how the past interacts with the present lives of your characters.
Head on over. Yeah, I mean, that's really like the book is about grappling with the past. But yeah, that line that's kind of quoted that Paul says, it is true that you can't change the past by looking at it, but in a way that's like also like a flawed logic, I think. And like a lot of the time, like Paul's logic is a little bit like twisted by her own like perspectives and like what's happened to her as well. And I think like really what she ends up doing is like maybe not changing the past, but like changing like the position of the past in her life. And that's really kind of what the book ends up being about. Like that's like it doesn't have to be like a character at one point says, you know, like something to her along the lines of like, sure, that's something that happened to you, but that's not the whole you know, that you're more than these experiences. And I think once she kind of reaches the point that she realizes that, well, I can build towards a different life, like that's kind of like where she kind of ends up starting to become free from the cycle if she's like ever going to actually, you know, recovery is not linear. So it's like, I don't want to say that this is like a recovery narrative where you feel like, okay, like everything's fine, the past doesn't affect us anymore. But the dedication in the book is actually like to the past, goodbye. And so in a way it is about that, like, okay, I acknowledge you, but also I don't need you anymore.
I was hoping to have a bit more time to think.
I'm sorry. Okay, I can make up some more stuff.
No, I'm so interested in how you think about it, how Jess presents this and thinks about this. I think for me, like, kind of the answer is in the story that I read out, the way that the past is present for the characters, and that was one of the things that I was trying to capture in the texture of the writing. You know, that experience of, you know, you're here, you're walking along the street, and then suddenly you're 30 years back, or, you know, 5 years in the past. I find that almost infinitely bewildering and confusing. But that's the way that we go through life. And narrative often limits that. Narrative often is a little bit propulsive, and the story kind of forces itself onwards and wants you to come to a conclusion. And all the way through the writing, I was trying to resist that a little bit and move between times, not only chronologically and structurally in the ways that I mentioned earlier, but in that kind of microscopic way as well, even, you know, sentence by sentence or thought by thought, because that's part of the weirdness being here.
Well, I guess I can make a couple of observations following on that kind of, you know, of the shiny way we look at the early 60s, which doesn't relate to what the early 60s are really like. But, you know, all my writing, you know, has this mixture of dark and light. And, you know, I'm always pushed towards making a little joke. And you know, in university, you know, professors would say, that's flippant. It doesn't belong in a university essay. And I thought they say, oh, you have how much sarcasm I had written out of it before you even saw it. But so it's my nature to do that. And I think it's a way of kind of lifting the burden of the past and kind of making a little offhand joke about it. You know, if it's off color as well as offhand, well, you know, somehow that just makes me feel even better somehow. But at the same time, all that being so that's kind of the, you know, when I approach somebody like Sister Harriet, who has had a traumatic past, a difficult past, you know, I'm just very cautious. You know, my characters aren't really drawn from life; they're drawn from genre fiction. I take off the shelf and then play with some more, and I add depth, and I add something, and then I got something that, you know, is getting to be a bit tense for me, but, you know, so. In a joke, you know, but at the same time, I mean, you know, to offer that alternative sense of darkness to the kind of fake shininess of 62, I was reminding myself throughout that, say, someone like Harriet, who's 29 in the early 60s, was born at the beginning of the Great Depression, and that is intimately connected with the, you know, the awful poverty of her early years, the trauma of her father leaving on a train to go out west, look for a job, and never returning. You know, the illness of her mother, the way her relatives treated her like, you know, flotsam and so forth. That's all part of it. Now you think, having just said that's a major part of the story, but it's not. You know, in fact, it's kind of condensed, rushed, you know, little, you know, like not even really scenes where I go back into the past. I don't do that. It's just sort of, you know, as part of the narrative flow. She's sitting in a car, you know, waiting for the dentist appointment, and then this comes to her, and I shove it through kind of fast, and you might be tempted as a reader to actually skip through it almost, but that's that way of kind of like downplaying it. Because I don't know, it's just the kind of writer I am. I want to come close to things that are awful. There's a lot of social stratification in Buttonville with all its shininess. There's like shanty towns. There's there's like factory areas. The shimmer around the Basilica Spire is actually factory smoke. So but I approached this. I always wanted to put some distancing framework between me and. So I want to keep you. You said the day you finished the story, the day after you found out about the election, and it made you feel good. Like that's sort of what I really want to do when I write. I want to feel good, and I also, in this dark world we live in, which I consider is broken, just like everybody else, and the tapestry has been torn and torn again. I want those frames, those almost fairy tale-like frames, so that you could think, you could believe for a moment anyway. It's sort of utopian in a way that someone with a background as horrific as Harriet's could transcend, through things that aren't necessarily rational and don't involve like years and years of therapy, but that are sort of the stock in trade of writers. Take one of my favorite writers, Thompson Highway. The way he works myth and humor into creating a sense of transcendence. So I sort of, am saying to myself, well, can I create even in a narrative pockets of utopian reclaiming? So, for example, the way I portray St. Reginald's as a community of women in a world where of 1962, where, let's face it, patriarchy was in full swing. Yeah. So I exaggerate that because then I think, well, actually among women, relations like that exist all the time. So just like draw attention to them, shine a light on them. Write more about women, less about men. So those are small things I do, but the very tone I use, is I suppose, with its little off-color jokes and all of that is funny, destruction of the entire elite of the city, like what some moment, it's just definitely going to be funny. And it's the kind of thing that we sat around at an office meeting on a Friday afternoon, your boss was there, your boss's bosses were all there, and you just hate everybody in the room, and you start saying to yourself, wouldn't it be nice if a bomb dropped right and it all swept away? Yeah, but I'm here too, so that could be awkward. So it was one of those moments, the sheer like malicious joy of imagining all these bad people dead at once. It sort of just took over. So that's what I do. I try to wrap trauma in whatever tools and techniques and elements of genre that that you could possibly bring. They may be just shreds, to still create a sense of or to suggest that life can be enjoyed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Without being a problem.
You're right. So in all of your books, your characters are intertwined in sometimes complex, damaging, and traumatic ways to other characters. I wanted to talk, and I said this to all of you, this might be too humanly huge of a question, but I wanted to talk about how you wanted to explore human connection and relationships in your work.
Reverse direction.
All right. Human connection. Well, I did think about that. When she sent the questions to allay our anxiety, she sent the questions ahead of time that spiked mine. So I thought, man, that's a tough question.
Yeah. Want me to skip it?
No, because I did think that. When I thought of it from a formal perspective, all novels are really about, webs of human relationships. So by the very fact that we write a novel, as opposed to, I don't know, an epic, we have created a world of random particularities and characters of middle degree who are interrelating with one another and influencing them, one another to a considerable extent. So in that world, you will have, complex relationships, and when the great story of the hero, for example, everything's foreordained, and all that's gone. Where do your influences come from? They come from one another. They come from randomness. They come from the environment. They come from the salutary moments too, you know. So that's kind of, I think the more general answer. And then I can also just point out that, but then I thought about what those relationships are. So you have like a bunch of clubs, Buttonville is a city of clubs and clubbiness, which really means people thinking in a, all in the same way, like is a motif that runs through the story. But then you have groups where, you have people like the people on the Buttonville civic committee that have dreams of avarice and glory and then what happens to those people. But then you also have more utopian like relations that are suggested as possible, so many stories are written about women in domestic settings, and I really enjoy being able to take the protagonist of my story out of a heterosexual domestic situation without making a big song and dance about it and putting her in a community among other women and then amping that up. And the connections among the women who in this particular environment are young and full of life and don't know that President Kennedy is about to be assassinated and everything's going to tank. And so therefore do have a certain optimism and can support one another and feel that and then even I don't know, that's probably going too far to say, offer that as a model, but going back to my earlier point that these in some of the darkness of life, it's those very relationships that sustain us. They don't necessarily the typical, that we get shoved down our throat all the time, of things like heterosexual norms, families, women who live without men, that's a strange idea still to us, and it's striking to me that it's so strange. It continues to be so strange, but I think that tells you how difficult. I'm stepping out of the novel as a form now, but just how difficult relationships itself can, they're cut across in so many ways by things that we can't control. We don't like them, but we still can't overcome them. Yeah.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
It's just the same. One of the things that I thought would happen, one of the things I thought I'd have to talk about more in my book was all the sex. There's a lot of kind of bad sex in the book, and it hasn't arisen as a subject to my surprise. But
does anybody want to talk about someone shitting in someone's mouth? No. I had it.
I don't know what you're talking about. But when I was imagining the question, like when I was imagining what I'd say, the answer was about connection. The answer was about people kind of stumbling towards some kind of connection with each other and faltering and trying again and again in this most intimate, visceral, personal of ways. But I noticed that in the book, it's a repeated set of mistakes that is sort of comical and absurd at times. I guess I'm interested in the effort and chronicling, or I don't know, portraying the various ways it can go wrong. I always find myself drawn to those kinds of books and those kinds of writing and plumbing those dramatic qualities for it. And leaving the more positive possibilities off to real life, maybe.
Yeah, I think both those answers were so interesting to me, like especially just thinking about the novel as like an interwoven series of human connections. And like I totally agree with you, Damian, on being interested in like how connection kind of can go south. And like, I also have a lot of bad sex in my book, and it is like sort of the same thing, right? Like it's like people just trying to like grasp at a way to connect with each other that's like often the like what is not the actual desire in the moment. Like the desire is, and Paul even talks about it at times, like just being like you know, sometimes maybe I just needed to be held or just needed to be close to someone. And it's kind of like really the series of things that have unfolded for her have really come from like not having that need met, like not having that desire for true connection and like truly being seen as like another human being with, you know, all the thoughts and depths as whoever she's interacting with. And yeah, and like it really like this question about connection, it's like really the reason why I write. Like I feel like a lot of the time I'm like drawn to writing because I have like sort of a question around like why people will act the way that they do, or like why are people interacting in certain ways, or you know, really just like you know, at its heart, like that's the basic like human dilemma, right? Like how do we connect? Like how do we figure out a way to like connect past difference? How do we find a way to connect when we don't always know how to communicate what we actually need, or the ways that we really truly want to connect? What does it even mean to truly connect? And even like the character of Paul, like I was drawn to her because she was a character that was in Paul's, and she's in 3 of the stories. And so I was writing some background kind of because she alluded to her past, and I was like, well, tell me about it, Paul, like what's going on? And she didn't want to, and she's very evasive, and the way that she talks is I'm very direct and she's not. And I was interested in, you know, like that type of person, because I've interacted with lots of people like that as well, where, you know, you're trying to like have a heart to heart and they're sidestepping, you know, or you're really open and they're closed. And I was wondering, like, you know, if her journey is to get to a point that she's able to like find connection or be a little bit realer with people in her life, or a little bit more open, like what does that look like, considering she has these blocks in that area? And like what would an opening up slowly look like for this character? And I found it like really interesting. And so I think a lot of the time, like writing for me is a way to connect, and to connect with the world and to connect with others, either in a fictional sense where it's like a thought experiment almost. But on the other hand too, it's like writing the book, I've had lots of people reach out to me too and just like sort of say that like the book made them feel like not alone, and made them feel like really seen and stuff like that. And that's really why I wrote it. There were times when I thought I might not even put it out because I was worried about, like, you know, like I mentioned before, like when you're writing about like serious subject matter, you kind of have to weigh like, is this going to do good or is this going to do harm? And I want those balances always to be like that anything that I'm doing is putting more good into the world. I'm not hurting people. And so like to hear that it did have like a positive impact on some people, like there's that connection. So it's like both the subject matter and like the purpose, right?
Thank you for that. So I think this leads me into which one do I want to ask now? Does anyone else have any questions? I'm gonna hog the stage. Okay, so in each of your books, childhood is in some way haunting your characters. As I mentioned in a question to Jess, it's a mystery really how we become who we are. Despite our therapist's best intentions, there's no way of really unrolling an accurate map of our childhoods and pinpointing the cause of our upness, I guess. I feel as an avid reader, and have probably always felt, that fiction has given me the answers to the questions I have about life. It's probably why I read so much. So I want to ask this question because I have a question. I can answer this question as a writer too. So I want to ask you, as a writer, do you find yourself exploring questions? And Jess, I think you sort of answered it a wee bit, that you want answers to, and in kind of throwing these characters that you've all created into a room and seeing if they can come up with the answers to the questions you.
Yeah, I feel like I basically said that. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yeah, I read the questions ahead of time. Like I did read them, but I didn't try and like script anything out so that I could be in the moment. But yeah, I think yes.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thought. Right? It's such an interesting question. I was pondering that yeah all night as well, and hoping you wouldn't ask. It's such a big question. I'm not sure that I get a lot of answers when I'm reading. When you're writing, yeah, you're driven by questions, absolutely, and you're always trying to see where they're going to lead you, and where the ribbon is going to unfurl. But a lot of I'm trying to remember who said, probably Chekhov who said this, like it usually is, but you know, the story doesn't answer a question. The purpose of the work of art is to phrase the question more correctly.
Phrase the question.
Yeah. So I think I don't have a lot of my own ideas. I have a lot of ideas from other people's brilliant books, and that's kind of how I see it as well. That when I'm reading, you do get something like I don't want to pretend it's only questions because that would be an evasion. You do get temporary answers. You get guidance. You get a new map that takes you a little bit further along the way. You get some temporary reorientation, but then you keep reading and keep adjusting, and I think as everyone said, that's what leads into your writing, and that's what feeds into your further questioning, your further reframing, and that's what keeps the whole glorious business going.
I'm gonna have to ask you for that last final line again, where you ask as a writer.
Yeah, I find a lot of answers to big life questions when I read. I also find it when I write. So as a writer, do you find yourself exploring questions, like throwing some characters into a room and seeing how they answer a big question you have?
So I guess the answer is yes and no. It depends what you mean by a question. I deliberately engage big questions, big philosophical questions, trot out names like Teilhard de Chardin and talk about, doubt and things like that. But I'm not addressing those religious questions, the questions of doctrine or faith and its place in our life directly. But I'm coming at them kind of from a comic angle of we are all in this soup together. There is a soup of recipes for living, or recipes for understanding, for superior perception of the world. And, but we all have to just kind of get from morning till night and then rinse and repeat. And so it's more like the characters. So like Sister Harriet, who just drives herself with questions and that. And she's saying, oh, she's sitting in a really boring pre-Easter Saturday. That 3 hour, if anybody's a Catholic, that 3 hour thing that goes on Saturday afternoon before Easter. This is the most longest and boring. No, the one on Saturday was just, at least Good Friday you have to tragedy, but Saturday she's like waiting. Yeah, and she's trying to wool gather, and she's reminding herself that she read somewhere, read something about some theologians, these latest theologians in the 60s in Europe, who said they could, you could be religious without actually believing in God. And she's like, hey, maybe that would work for me. And then she also has this moment where she thinks, well, maybe my haunted irreligiousness is more attractive to God. Should God exist, but and it's more sophisticated anyway. But that's the way she's answering them. But still, she's spending up a spirit amount of bandwidth. So it's not like I'm even necessarily suggesting that I'm offering these as kind of comic interludes, but if I was suggesting anybody was finding a way to kind of, to find a rhythm, amid all the incomprehensible aspects of life, it would probably be more like these characters who are really feral in the story. Yeah. But the Sister Clotilde, it's like one of my favorites, or Brother Cyprian doesn't seem to, he always makes me think of that character in the Rolling Stones song, Jumping Jack Flash, like how bad it is, it's all right, life's a gas. So I think there's almost a kind of poise that we can find that doesn't necessarily involve like a rational inquiry. I guess I'm tending for suggesting the world is irrational, so why try? And definitely it involves some aspect of our creative, as a writer, of creative desire to imagine worlds other than our own and find something compelling in them that is different, and which is just as important. It's just as important for me to read about other people's imaginary worlds too, and to, you know, to think of myself as, oh, I never looked at it that way. Doesn't mean that I have to adopt it, but you know, if it enriches my world and makes, you know, and makes me feel differently about something, then to me that's you know, that's better than philosophy any day.
Okay, I just have one more question, but this is really just to boost book sales here at Type Books. And if you feel like you need more raffle tickets, I'm going to do the raffle right after this. So if you could name one book, do you remember? Or maybe two, that had the greatest, you can also just if you could name one book or maybe two that had the greatest influence on the writing of this book, what would it be?
Yeah, because I wrote this book over like a 10-year period, like that's why it's like kind of hard to pick just one. I'm trying to think. I mean, I would like I think maybe like Fall on Your Knees like had like a lot. It's like not while I was like writing the book, but it was one that I read in undergrad. I think many people probably did. But it is one that like stuck with me, especially in like having it be like I think it's like a relatively like respectful like way of like writing about trauma, and like really before it was really, you know, like in the like right now, I think we're kind of in like a time period where people are like really interested in talking about it. They're interested in talking about how we grapple with it. And then before like the time period that we're in now, a lot of the time it was just like used for plot. And I feel like Fall on Your Knees doesn't use it just for plot. It is more kind of like a very, very similar to like a lot of like the way that we're seeing trauma talked about now. So I think that's pretty good. In terms of like the kind of books that I really, really love are like books where you're really close to the characters' like perspective, so that you're really your experience of the world becomes the character's experience of the world. In particular, like a lot of women writers, like I feel like Rachel Cusk is like that. I feel like I really like Elif Bodeman, like The Idiot and Either Or. Normally, like I wear around like a hat that just says like Elif Bodeman everywhere. So yeah, I think if you wanted to buy like a Jess Taylor recommends that. I also love Night Bitch. It was probably like my favorite book that I read, but I read it postpartum, so I could be biased because of that, but I don't think so.
I think every story in the book is kind of in conversation with another author, and or influenced or collaborating with, or speaking back to in ways that I've only kind of realized recently, because now I'm kind of consciously trying to work on a book of stories that they're all sort of adaptations and collaboration, and having to put the other story at the head of the page as opposed to just kind of invisibly doing it. So there's a lot of Beckett from when I was studying, and like breathing in Beckett and reading in Beckett and just kind of plagiarizing it out. Harold Pinter as well. It's like there's a play in the book that's very, very Pinterish. Someone has told me, and I've realized, oh yeah, that's true. There's an American writer called Tom Jones, who's a wonderful short story writer who I discovered in a writing group, not our one, a different one. And I was kind of stuck with this story that was kind of ponderous and plodding and going nowhere. And I read one of his stories, and I realized, oh, that's what I got to do. I've just got to stick 80 trillion volts into this, and then it's going to work. And that's what happened. The main one, though, is probably behind Alison, like directly behind your head. It's purple, so very easy to purchase today if you want to. You see the Swim in a Pond in the Rain, the George
Oh my God.
So I actually weirdly get enthused by criticism. Like nobody ever says that. Everybody hates literary criticism. It's like the worst thing in the world. But you read a critic who knows how to read, knows how to like pick things out and discover things. For me, at least, I find it like, boom, okay, that's what I want to try and do. So this is the book where there's, I think, yeah, Chekhov, there's 3 Chekhov stories and 2 Turgenev, and there's a couple of Tolstoy ones. So if you just read the stories, you're going to have a great time. But then you have his commentary on it, which is hilarious, incredibly insightful, and human and kind of gloriously compassionate way that I read that, and I wasn't writing short stories at the time. I wasn't writing much, and it got me going again. With all this, and just like this last thing I'm going to say, just my daughter, when she was younger, she was a bit of an artist. My son, who's a bit older, came home, and he'd been doing some drawing at school, so he had some cross hatching, like shadow, that he discovered how to do. And my daughter saw it. She's 4 years old. She goes, "How did you do that?" And she took it, and I thought she was going to eat it. Like, she was so drawn by it, and she kept hold of it, and she started drawing and copying, and yeah, that's what happened to me with that Saunders book. That's what you're looking for in terms of influence.
I have to just make a remark about nonfiction, prose essays, because when you said that, my mind just lit up inside. I'm in the middle of reading. I have a terrible memory. Who was the woman who had a child with H.G. Wells? West, her name is Rebecca West. So I'm reading. She wrote a book about the traitors of the 20th century. And she was a journalist, and she wrote very much in the Orwellian style, deep journalism. And anyway, I'm reading that now. And I mentioned earlier Rachel Carson. So often books, nonfiction titles are inspire me or interest me. However, to recreate the kind of busy Byzantine Gothic world of Buttonville, undoubtedly the original influence was a collection of 3 novels, and I don't know why. You never really know why one thing is just your guiding light forever, or or your foot nailed to the ground and you always go in that circle, and you don't really know. But Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast trilogy, the texture of the world, the detail, the fact that nobody's really good, but everybody's interesting, the weird Gothic weight of things, and yet there's no magic in the stories. The sheer force of it, but I remember reading the first of those books when I was in my late teens. It was like walking through the door to another world, and it was like a more adult version of reading a Narnia book. But it stuck with me all my life. I thought, that's that. Wandering around the castle's decayed halls with fear and those terrible characters. Somehow I felt an affinity there. Really, I cannot explain. And some of that energy I wanted to put into, and I put into, I can't keep Gothic out of anything I write.
Yeah.
So it just wants to keep coming in. And then I can cite one other influence for this particular book, but it's not a book. It's that beautiful artistic animated film called The Triplets of Belleville. Yes. So while I had gathered, while I continued to procrastinate and was reading all my books alongside, and at the height of the pandemic, I rewatched that, and there was something about it and its energy. It's got that Gothic kind of vibe too, but I thought, I know I'm going to write mainly, it's going to be nominal mystery, and it's going to be, on the surface anyway, mainly realistic, whatever that means. But I want some of that feral energy, and the sheer distortion that, in the it's a work of art. So, and you will often see replicated online when you can watch it, especially that when that huge ship from New York sails across the ocean, and there's some, I don't know what it is. Is it the Jupiter Symphony or something? Anyway, that is playing it. That's right. And it's just so powerful. And I thought, that's it. I want my bridge to be all distorted and weird and powerful and taking over and yet beautiful and possibly evil, but uncanny. And I don't want anybody to make me explain it either. I just want it. So anyway, so you know, I spent a lot of time reading fairy tales and being read to by my mother fairy tales. That was the only book I was willing to type of story I wanted to be to have read to me. And I just think I the fabular and the fairy tale just, you know, I just can't really, you know, somehow why? I mean, I don't know, but they just seem to open the door and show a world so expansive to me that I am reluctant to let it go.
Thank you so much. Cayley.
Anybody have a final?
Final chance.
Yeah, it's like, I'll tell you more about the pictures, but yeah.
Also, anyone listening and anyone here, if you are a fan of exploring the short story, George Saunders' Substack, which I can't remember the name of it. Do you know this?
I'll find it.
George Saunders' Substack is genius and worth the paid subscription. I don't pay this subscription, but I'm Storytime. Yes. Thank you. Storytime. Yeah, so good. He really is. This book, Diana, if you haven't, this book is like taking his class. He teaches creative writing. Yeah. You don't have to. You don't have to. Like, my friend Kate and I talk about this book all the time. It's just a touch point, and everything that George Saunders has the gift child. Also short story writers. Elaine McCluskey is an incredible short story writer. This is not a short story. Elaine was with us a couple of weeks ago for Junction Reads Online. So this is what you're winning: today's 3 books and Elaine's book.
Okay, gotta get a lucky hand.
Or the auditor's here.
Yeah, the auditor.
So are these direct names or their numbers? They're just names. Pamela at.
Oh, okay, I'm gonna do another one because Pam actually bought. Sorry, Pam.
Okay. Next time.
You already paid for it. You can't get a refund.
We got a J. We got an A. We have a C. We have a K. Jack B.
Oh, Jack had something, but he's Anna.
Oh, okay. All right, perfect.
There
you go.
Winning ticket.
These are okay. So the one that I read gently is Tomas Hashard's book. These are. Oh no, I guess I read Dave's book too. So, but I'm a really good reader. Really, I love books. So you've got
Horse at the Window. Right?
Horse at the Window, very good. I got 3 copies of it from Nancy. Which was so Tomas Hashard, City in Flames, Megan Greeley, Jawbone, Spencer Gordon's A Horse at the Window, and Dave Furlow's incredible Deep Sea Themes.
You
can't shake your head at me.
Oh, it's Jake. Marilyn BT, congratulations.
Oh yeah.
That's my mom.
Okay. Is it?
You want to take that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, I'll take them too. Mom, you won. It's Spencer's book. I could have got it for you, but I think you'll enjoy them.
Okay, that's it. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much. And Jess, and Cayley, and everybody online. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, I forgot to mention.
Oh no.
Did you stop the recording, Cayley? No, okay. I just want to mention that I added in very light architectural pencil. I'm sorry. So this Thursday, the 14th, I'm going to talk to Deborah Timmett with her book Window Shopping for God. That's the Instagram live series. And then we're back on Junction Reads online with Sheila James and Outcased. And then on December 3rd, I'm talking to Adele Purdom about her collection of essays, I Don't Do Disability, and Other Lies I Told Myself. And if you're sitting here right now and thinking to yourself, or if you're there thinking to yourself, man, I really want to see that Damian guy in real life, he's going to be at Vaughan Civic Center Resource Library on November 19th, and there's other events on his website. This is the last event for Jess this year, which makes me sad, but Anna's official launch for the Suspension Bridge is at Flying Books this Tuesday, November 12th, at the College Street location. And that's it. Thank you. 6:30.
Oh, yes, of course.
Well, and if you want your book signed, you should find the author.